Okay.
Okay, great. Thanks
Okay,
for letting me
thanks.
talk about
Thanks.
this.
Yeah, thanks, David. Okay, so I'm being joined now by Margarita, an essayist I discovered on Substack, and she also has a Twitter account. Margarita, can you hear me okay?
Yes. Can you hear
Okay,
me?
yes, I hear you just fine. So let me read from some of your recent tweets, which caught my attention. You're talking about the importance of poise and good posture, and I really like this thread. So you write something I learned from being a finalist at Miss World Canada. Confidence is more important to beauty than anything else. The girls who had the strongest and most attractive presence were also very confident. Their kindness and grace filled up the room. Good posture mimics confidence, tries to teach your body how to cultivate this attitude. Confident people have good posture. When you stand tall, you feel tall. So is your perspective on posture something that primarily works from the inside out or from the outside in?
Um, I think that with posture, it's a good training tool. It's kind of like acting how you want to be, like manifesting it. When you have good posture, I don't know how exactly it works, but it does help. For example, if you just sit with good posture and walk with good posture, you'll automatically just feel more confident. I'm not exactly sure how it works, but it just does.
And so is this something that you feel like you're directing from the inside out, that you have the confidence and the grace and then that exhibits in the posture, or is it something you're thinking about the posture first and then the confidence and the grace comes from that, or are they both so constantly interacting with each other that it's hard to disentangle them?
I think it's both. I think that someone who is naturally already very confident, for example, they have a lot of accomplishments or they're a very mature person, they would already feel confident and it would just come from inside. But I think that if someone doesn't feel confident and doesn't have high self-esteem, working on your posture can be one way to increase it and
Yeah.
like cultivate that attitude.
hmm And what did you learn from this whole experience of competing in the Miss Universe Canada pageant?
Um, well, I kind of did it just for fun. It was like a new experience. But yeah, I think the confidence idea was the main one that I learned because in every single task or challenge that we were participating in, um, the girls who got the best scores, we weren't able to see the scores, but except for the end, um, they were always like the most confident ones who were unafraid to be themselves and show their personality. So I think that that was that was the primary lesson that I learned from Miss Canada was how to be more comfortable with yourself so that you can show your true personality.
And the thing that immediately struck me about your writing was its sincerity. So, is it lonely to be sincere in an ironic and often sarcastic world?
Um, I'm not sure. I guess it's, well, the world is lonely, but for other reasons because we're isolated from each other and from normal human interactions today, due to lockdowns and quarantines. But I think like when I started writing, I didn't write for a particular person. I write more for myself it's a very cathartic exercise because when you're faced with a very difficult question to ask, for example, is abortion right? Um, the most difficult thing to, like, the easiest way to handle this question is to not think about it. But then it bothers you because then it keeps coming up in conversation and you're not quite sure what the right answer is because you hear good points on both sides. So writing for me has been a really good way to answer these questions in the most sincere and honest way possible and come to the most reasonable answer. So I've always been doing this since I was a teenager in my journal, just thinking about important questions, trying to answer them honestly. But then I only started publishing it recently and it came off to people, like I got a response to it, which I was not expecting, which was people said that it was sincere writing. So I wasn't trying to make it popular or make like get clicks or anything. So I think that's why it comes off like that. So I'm glad it had a positive impression.
So, is the sincerity that comes through in your writing, is it a choice or does it just inherently flow from how you approach life?
I think it just comes from the purpose of the writing in the first place because I didn't write to impress a person or cater to a specific type of audience. So I think that's the sincerity comes from the intention, which was just to answer the question as reasonably as I can.
Interesting. And how do you deal with sarcasm and irony in real life?
Um, yeah, it's I like I the way that I write is not how I interact with normal people in my life, like my friends, family, normal conversations. I try to keep it more professional whenever I put anything on the internet because I know that the internet is permanent and follows you for your whole life. Whereas like if you say something humorous, it can be taken out of context or people might not understand that it's tongue in cheek and like they just, they twist the meaning of it and it's not what you intended. So when I'm in my personal life, like I speak a lot differently than when I'm on the internet.
Right. That makes sense. So, how would you describe your worldview?
Uh, that's a big question. My worldview, I guess, can you narrow down the question? My worldview for what?
Okay, so let's just start with politics. So I guess my worldview for politics is that human nature is not basically good, and so everything that I believe about politics just flows from that. That I have a deep skepticism of human nature. But how would you describe your worldview, say, with regard to politics?
I would describe it a little differently than yours. I think people are basically good. I think the majority of people that I've encountered and I believe about the world is that people are basically good. It's just that, most people, they lack the courage to act on their virtues. And I think that if people who are, for example, more intelligent, able to accrue more power, take the responsibility of that power and create a world in which it's easier for people to act on their best intentions and their best selves, I think that is how politics should work, or ideally how the world should work. I read this book. I was really impacted by a character named Alyosha Karamazov in the book Brothers Karamazov by Dostoevsky because he said something that really stuck with me, which is it's really easy when you meet someone to bring out their worst nature and their worst selves, but the more difficult and more important task is to bring out the best side of themselves. And I think most people have a good side that we can bring out if we put in effort.
Now, on what basis do you believe that people are basically good?
Well, I've volunteered a lot ever since I was 14 years old because where I live, students have to complete 40 hours of mandatory volunteering, and then the program I was in, it had to be 300 hours. So I began volunteering like that. So I was volunteering in after school programs for children. I was volunteering to help the homeless in different worshiping places like temples and churches. I would volunteer, like, there were so many different events to raise money for things. So I had a lot of opportunities to meet people from lots of different backgrounds of life and talk to them. And I don't know why I just have this personality where if someone meets me, they just blurt out their whole life story for some reason. Like even if I'm at the grocery store, it happens. Um, so I've met, like, from my experiences talking to lots of different types of people, I've learned that most people just want to do the right thing. Most people do have a conscience. It's just that, like, the world is not always structured in a way that makes it easy for them to act on their best selves. And if the world is as deranged as it is today, for example, it takes an extraordinary person to do the right thing rather than it being just the easy default choice.
So, have you read much history? I'm curious how someone can read about history and still maintain that people are basically good.
I have read like I've read enough history, I think. I took world history in school and I've read some of the books by Will and Ariel Durant. And I also like am a big fan of the Hardcore History podcast. So I know I'm well aware that evil things happen in the world and have happened. And I'm aware of the atrocities that entire countries and entire races of people can commit against millions of innocent people. But I think that doesn't, if we just boil that down to that happens because those people are evil, that is like not very useful. And I don't think it's very sincere. Like, I can't, it doesn't resonate with truth for me. I think there's more to it why these evil things happen. And with everything that we're seeing with COVID recently, we see normal people doing things that don't make any logical sense and aren't necessarily helping people around them. They're they're kind of falling into even like the BLM politics. They're falling into it rather than thinking about what actually is happening. What are the consequences of their actions? I think most of it happens from like a fear that most people have that they won't belong, or it comes from like not having the intelligence to critically think about what they're participating in. So that I would say like ignorance and fear of ostracism are not equal to pure evil. Like evil will do evil even when it's inconvenient.
So,
So that
so
that's why I don't think it's evil. I think it's something else.
do you believe that there is something objectively something that you could call evil? Do you think that's a real objective state?
I think there is evil. I don't doubt that it exists. That's why I'm very careful about the definitions of these things, because I think if we dilute the definition of what is evil and apply it very liberally, then we diminish the true power of actual evil that does exist in the world.
So, are you religious?
I would say so.
And could you elaborate on that? What is your religious outlook?
So, my family is Hindu and I was raised Hindu. I'm also like educated in Christian theology as well to a certain degree. For example, I had to read the Bible as a part of my English literature studies in university, and I found it very interesting. I read a lot about it, and then I was exposed to Jordan Peterson's Bible series podcast, where I learned a lot more about the meaning behind these different stories. And yeah, so I think I don't know like how I would identify myself in a specific box, but I do believe that God exists.
Would you describe yourself as Hindu, or what part of Hinduism is real and vibrant for you?
The part of Hinduism that I really appreciate is the idea of reincarnation. Um, and I really like appreciate the cyclical nature of everything that's described, that things don't just end. They have like I'm trying to think of particular examples. And it's difficult to do in English as well. So, because most of the stuff I learned is like in Sanskrit and Hindi. So, I like the idea that God comes in lots of different forms. It's the same God, but it's just it manifests in different ways. Um, and I like that idea because it tells me that there is something divine in each human being that they can call upon if they put in the effort, if if they're really living properly, which is like according to their dharma, which is dharma is like dharma is often translated as religion, but it doesn't just mean religion. Dharma means doing what you're supposed to be doing, living life right. I haven't read a lot about religion, so I can't speak very knowledgeably about either Hinduism or Christianity. So I won't be able to answer your questions maybe like as satisfyingly as someone who's more knowledgeable.
Yeah, I was just curious. So if your outlook on life doesn't primarily come from religion, then where does it come from?
My outlook on life comes from my family and the values that they have and that they instilled in me. So I know this sounds very normal, but it actually these are like the small things, the small ordinary things are often what end up being the most important. So my parents were they were strict, but they didn't actually have like a set of rules for us to follow growing up. They just had a set of values, and we my siblings and I knew what those values are so that anywhere we go in the world, any decision we're making, before we'd even like we'd ask permission for our parents to do certain things, and then right after we asked, they wouldn't just say yes or no. They would ask us if we thought it was the right thing to do, and often we'd already know what the answer is. So that kind of instilled confidence in us that we already know what's right and wrong in our heart if we just like are honest with ourselves. So I think that's where most of my values come from, and it also like instilled an idea in me that it's really important to never lie to yourself. So as I got older and I went to university and I interacted with more of Western culture, I I don't think I fell into the normal traps that ordinarily young people fall into because there was something in my heart that couldn't accept everything very easily when I put it to the test, like to understand if it's the right or wrong thing. For example, one of the things was that really stuck out to me was when I was 18, I learned the idea that you can't be, it's impossible to be racist to a white person because racism is about structural power. And I'm not white, so like it was difficult for me to understand that. But everybody around me kept repeating it. So then then one time, like I actually thought to myself, I was in a discussion with some people and I said, like, that's like if racism is treating someone differently because of their skin color, then it doesn't matter what structural powers there are. Like, it's still wrong to treat someone poorly because they're white. And I think that's one of the things that stuck out that I couldn't just accept, and everybody around me was just accepting it easily.
How old were you when this happened, and were there social consequences for your position?
I was 18 or 19, and the social consequences, like there are some people, I guess where I live, there people are not as left leaning or liberal as others, but um, yeah, I kind of just like it just helped filtered my friends. The people who spoke like that, I just didn't feel like speaking to them again, so I just didn't. And the people who did think like me, who were more logical, became even closer friends.
Now, everyone who doesn't know anything about Hinduism knows that it historically had a caste system. What do you think about caste systems in general?
So, what I know about the caste system is that it started for a very logical reason that different members of society have different specialized jobs, and this specialization permits society to function better. What I think about the caste system in practice, like how what it became, I like obviously I don't agree with it because it traps people into certain jobs and into often like stigmatized social roles just because of the family name that they're born into. I don't think that's fair. I think if someone has skill and has drive and ambition, they should be able to do whatever job that they set their mind to. I think that's more beneficial for society. It's not necessary that if you're born to like a shoemaker, you have to become a shoemaker. And I don't think that one thing that I especially don't like about caste system is that it doesn't respect every single job. So that's not how it started in the like how caste system in its inception, it didn't have any kind of stigma for one job or the other. Like the person who is taking care of the dead isn't supposed to have a lower status than someone who's making gold jewelry. But for some reason, because of human nature, the stigmatization and social hierarchies did arise. So I think that's not right, and I think it's good to do away with that aspect and just like of caste system entirely, which is that just because someone is a janitor or someone is making tools that they have a lower status in society. I don't think that's right.
Do you think that there are real differences between men and women, or do you think the differences that we see are simply created by the structure of society?
I definitely think there are definitely differences between men and women that are in here in their biology.
And which would be the most dramatic differences from your perspective? And how scary, how frightening are these differences to you?
I don't think that they're frightening. I think they're only frightening to someone who lives their life and plans everything in their life according to the idea that men and women are the same. If you've been making all your decisions based on that premise, then yes, realizing that your underlying principle it has been wrong this whole time is scary. But I think for someone who doesn't plan their life according to that, they they don't have anything to be scared of these differences. So I'll just list some of them off. The biological differences that are obvious to most people are that women produce eggs, whereas men produce sperm. Women carry the child, whereas men can only men cannot do that. Women are play a larger role in early childhood care because of breastfeeding, co-sleeping, all of these bonding activities. Um, so those are the main, and obviously also the biological differences in bone development. Women have more estrogen than men. So interestingly, in both sexes, testosterone is the dominant hormone. It's just that a lot of people don't know that. It's just that women have more estrogen, which causes their bones to form a lot quicker in life, and then they also have some protections against heart disease because of this extra estrogen. So all of these biological differences are going to be obvious. Women are shorter than men generally. Women are um, like more likely to have iron deficiencies. All of these things. Psychologically, the differences are like a little bit more nuanced and difficult to grasp because I think it's been so difficult to do actual studies on these psychological differences without getting into trouble because it's within the Overton window. Like it's not acceptable to even suggest that there could be psychological differences between men and women generally. Um, I think when I read about these differences, a lot of people it makes many people angry, but and they'll point out, oh well, most guys are better at spatial visual tasks than women, but how can that be if I'm a girl and I'm a dental surgeon, which requires really excellent spatial visual skills? So I think when people approach it like that, it's kind of like saying most men are taller than women, and then a really tall woman comes up and says that fact is untrue, but it's just as ridiculous because obviously we're talking about the norm, the middle of the bed. We're not talking about the exceptions.
Yes. So one difference that I didn't realize until I heard it on the radio a couple of decades ago was that men rarely physically feel unsafe, but according to this woman on the radio, almost every day women will have an experience where they have some concern about their physical safety. Does that ring true to you?
So I can't speak for all women. That's been the main difficulty in me understanding these ideas. And actually, like I'm going to go back to when I was first exposed to the ideas of feminism. I was constantly told that women are oppressed in this way, or that, women aren't permitted to speak in large group settings because of the patriarchy and structural oppression that they face. So when this is like when I was 18 or 19 again, and when I was in my classes, I was the type of student who always raised her hand and was always participating in the discussions and meetings. Um, and in fact, I had to consciously be like tell myself to not talk over certain men or allow other people to participate. I felt like I was the patriarchy, even though I was a girl. Um, so it was really like strange for me. And for the longest time I thought maybe it's because I'm weird and most girls aren't like this and that's why. And my experience is unique. But I started talking to many other girls and I realized that this might actually just be a made up narrative that's not true. And women have no such struggle, but it's just like a self-fulfilling prophecy that many women are told. So what was your question again? You were asking, do I feel unsafe? I personally don't feel unsafe. Like I think I can't remember the last time I felt unsafe. So, and I'm a very courageous person. I like not courageous. I'm a very independent person. Um, and I've traveled and everything too. I understand why women should feel more unsafe when they're traveling alone, for example, or they're living in a more unsafe country or unsafe area of the city, because they have a physical disadvantage if they're being attacked. But I personally don't feel unsafe every day. I feel normal.
And how would you describe feminism and what? Tell me more about your attitude towards feminism.
That's a very big question again. I have a lot of ideas about feminism. I think that it started off with good intentions, but it devolved into something that is not something I would identify with today. I think, in fact, it harms many women. I think many people have used the word feminism to label ideas that actually harm women very deeply. For example, using the word feminism and empowerment to advertise the idea that women should should have casual sex or should make OnlyFans or to engage in any of these types of um, hoe activities. I don't know how else to say it. When like it's harmful to women because you harm yourself emotionally, you diminish your ability to attach to another person and form deep relationships. I don't think this is just exclusive to women, by the way. I think this also applies to men if they were to engage in the same behavior. But I think because of feminism attaching itself to these ideas, it's not necessarily good. Another thing is like sometimes I see comics that are circled around and reshared by numerous women, that say having a career is just as, or like a woman who doesn't have children is just as happy as a woman who does have many children and a family. I think that could be true for some women. I'm not going to deny it, but I think to advertise this to the majority of women as being applicable, I think it's disingenuous. Um, that's what I think about feminism is it has a lot of bad ideas attached to its name.
And how did you become red pilled?
Um, I can't really like point to one thing. I think I didn't really think about politics until I was partway through university because I was so focused on doing well in school that I think I wasn't even aware that I was a woman of color, quote unquote, until I was like 19. And I was like, wow, I'm a woman of color. What does this even mean? Because this was around the time when like politics was becoming more pervasive in everyday life, and it was just starting to become more and more annoying. We had to do this exercise where everyone in the class had to write down a micro that they had faced that day, and it was just so annoying because the things that people wrote down, like I remember thinking to myself, this is so stupid. Why are you getting offended by small little things? Because microaggressions basically, it just, you expect the worst intention from the other person when you have a quote unquote microaggression. Like for example, if somebody tells me I speak very good English when they see my face, um, like I can choose to be offended by that by saying, "Oh wow, like how dare you assume that I'm not from the same country as you?" But it also makes sense because that person doesn't have bad intentions. They just might not have been exposed to as many Indian women as, as somebody else. They might have grown up in a different place. Um, and obviously, it's not like, when you see someone who doesn't look like everybody else who's from that place, it's logical to assume that maybe they immigrated and learned English from scratch. So I just like I wouldn't get offended by it. So, but there are many people who would choose to get offended and would call this a microaggression, which is ludicrous. I think when I was around this age, I started to go on the internet more, and I found Jordan Peterson's lectures because one of my friends was at U of T and told me about this crazy professor who ended up in the news, and I looked him up, um, and like the our U of T professor, he was like quickly becoming famous. So I went to one of his talks. He came to our university. Then I started listening to his lectures, and I just thought they were brilliant. So I think that's where I like how I would describe my journey.
And did you lose friends from this journey?
Not really, because the friends that I had were all like I've had the same group of friends pretty much since I was 18, and one friend I've had since I was 11. I didn't really lose friends. I think it's because this is gonna sound silly, but it's because I didn't drink. So when I was 18, everybody around me in university, they were getting shit-faced because it was normal to do. And for me, it's like my parents had certain expectations of me, even though they wouldn't ever know if I was doing it. I just like felt this pit in my stomach, like I'm disappointing them because they had trusted me so much and like believed in me. I didn't want to let them down. Um, and I'm just like the type of person who I can't digest a lie. It just doesn't sit well with me. So I definitely think if you have lies or disingenuous intentions, I think they store themselves in your body, like and psychosomatically affect you in some way, but I'm not sure how. So because I wasn't participating in those activities, I wasn't drinking, I couldn't go out with normal people. So the people who stayed behind were like me. I mean, they did drink, but like they didn't like to go to the clubs and stuff. So we just, played board games. We hung out. We did other stuff. We went bowling and rock climbing, and we just became good friends because of that. Or we just wanted to study. So I know this sounds really nerdy, but I'm still friends with them. So it turned out good.
So how do you navigate a world that is not red pilled? You don't, you're not a hermit. You don't live on the side of a mountain or by yourself.
I think it takes a lot of courage to navigate a world that's not quote unquote red pilled because you have to be like you first of all you have to understand that your what your principles and values are, and you have to have courage in taking up those values and not giving them up just to fit into a conversation or to not ruffle somebody else's feathers. So it's kind of easier now because I spend more time with my family these days, and my family didn't have to become red pilled because they were never, I don't know, blue pilled in the first place. because they grew up in a very traditional upbringing, and so that's like already like that already has those traditional values that red pilling tries to bring people back to. So, for example, my mom is not red pilled because she never engaged in the bullshit in the first place. So, um, but when I'm with people my own age, sometimes I do come up against discussions or ideas where people are saying things that don't make logical sense or aren't very compassionate, and I don't point it out. I just like ask them good questions. And I'm very selective with who I spend my time with in the first place. So if somebody I know that politics shouldn't be the main thing that you make friends over, but if somebody is has values that are so diametrically opposed to mine, I can't really justify giving them pieces of my life, which is my time. But I do have some friends who have political views that are different than mine, but I've learned to watch their actions rather than what they say. So sometimes people will talk about things and repost things and have political opinions that seem very horrendous. But then when you see them, talk to them, and see how they interact with others and how they're going through their life, you see through their actions what their real values are. So these friends, even if they are politically left leaning in their words, in their actions, they're actually way more aligned with my values. So that's why I don't really talk about politics with them because I cannot convince them with my words, and I also don't need to because the way that they're acting is already in alignment with me.
So beautiful women face a challenge in that if they're simply decent and polite to a guy, he's very likely to misinterpret it as interest. Like if you give a guy a centimeter, he's going to try to take a mile. So any thoughts on how a beautiful woman can navigate navigate men, where a simple, hi, how are you, which is just meant pro forma, can very quickly get misinterpreted?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. I suppose you should always be straightforward with a person. Um, I'm never impolite to people unless they're impolite to me and I just say like that I don't appreciate that. Even in like sometimes people DM me and they're sometimes when people DM me, they're very polite, courteous, kind, and I tell them thank you. I don't rebuff it because I think somebody's hitting on me. I think that's not a good way to go through life. If somebody's paying you a genuine compliment, you should say thank you. You should be friendly to them. Um, if somebody is, I think a younger woman would not be able to tell perhaps if somebody's hitting on her or just being kind to her. But I think as you get older, you learn to figure it out, which is which. And if somebody is flirting with you but you're not interested, you can just say like, I appreciate the compliment, and then you just, you end the conversation. You don't need to keep the conversation going. I think that's where a lot of girls fall into a trap. It's they like the attention that they're getting. And so, in order to keep getting the attention from the person, they continue the conversation. They keep opening up pathways for the guy to take that inch. Um, but I think if you're self-aware and you know what you're doing, then then you know that you can't just keep opening up this pathway for them if you are not interested in them. Does that make sense?
Yes. So let's take a healthy and attractive woman. How much is she getting fed by guys hitting on her if these are guys that she has absolutely no interest in? I can understand a highly insecure woman feeling a sense of power and elation when guys she has absolutely no interest in are hitting on her. But what about a healthy and attractive woman? Does she get fed in a substantial way by guys who are of absolutely no romantic interest to her, paying her attention?
I think we need to like broaden the scope of this because that healthy girl, beautiful girl is not just a girl, she's a human being. And human beings all love attention, especially positive attention from people. I'm sure if you open your email tomorrow and you had 30 emails from people saying how brilliant your podcast is or how wonderful of a person they think you are, you would also find that it lifts your mood or makes you happy. Even if you're not interested in working with them or anything like that. So for like a girl, if she's getting lots of attention, of course it makes, even if she's not insecure, I think it makes anybody happy to get compliments and to get positive attention. And I think you don't need to respond to it negatively. You can just say thank you. Um, but if you're not like as long as it's courteous, if it's some people are don't have any manners when they're doing this type of thing, and for those you don't even need to respond. You can just, ignore it. Um, but if somebody is being polite, courteous, has good manners, and pays you a compliment, saying thank you is the polite thing to do. Um, and I think you can just, of course, it would make you feel good, but in your conscience that if you're not interested in them, it's not good for you to continue the conversation unless, of course, you want to follow up with that or you have some intentions with that person or you want to find out more about them.
Now, with all the attention paid to the Me Too movement, I've usually had the reaction that we have a profound effect on how other people speak to us and how other people treat us. So, for example, I can have a pretty raunchy sense of humor, but I could not even conceive of saying something raunchy to you because of the way that you present yourself. So how much of an effect do you think that we have on how other people react to us?
I think it's like it depends how close you are with them, how personal you are, and like what the context is. So if, I have close friends and they're not afraid to make offensive jokes to me because I'm their close friend. And I have friends who some friends are guys and some friends are girls. So like that's where the boundaries come in with relationships. And these are just social skills that you learn by living life. The Me Too movement, I'm not sure how it's affected people. I can make guesses and theories about how it's affected people, but I can't say for sure. The way we present ourselves definitely influences the ways that people interact with us. So this is called persona management or something like that. Um,
Yes.
you
Yeah.
have to be, yeah, image management.
Yeah.
You have to be aware of what you're doing and how it influences people's responses to you. I think the experimentation with image management is supposed to happen when you're a teenager because this is where you try on lots of different personalities and just see what happens. And you go to the extremes too. But as you get older, what should be happening is that instead of being worried about how people are going to respond to your image, you become more comfortable with who you are truly. And that is the image that you end up showing instead of the image that you feel like you need to show to get a certain response. That becomes very salesman-y and becomes disingenuous. And I think people can detect that. You can't form proper relationships with people if you're only showing a fragment of yourself because you're worried that the rest of you will not be palatable to them. Um, I think that you definitely have different faces for different people. So, for example, if you're speaking publicly or you're speaking to a potential employer or anything like that, you show a different side of your personality because you need a certain type of relationship with them. But when you're making friends or you're building personal relationships, you shouldn't wear a persona. You should just be yourself. As cliche as that sounds.
Do you notice any differences between the way men speak to you and the way they, say, speak to other people in your peer group?
I definitely noticed that men are very kind and courteous to me everywhere I've been in life, and I'm very lucky about that. I realized that it's called hot girl privilege. I'm not going to say that I'm like, I'm not being arrogant or anything like that. Like, I'm not the most beautiful girl or anything, you know. I just have noticed in my life that people, men and women, are generally very nice to me. And I realize that that happens to be because I have, like normal or above normal looks, and am like a pleasant person who doesn't look like, I'm going to cause a scene. When I go to the train station, there's always someone who helps me put my luggage away. Whether sometimes it's not the employee, sometimes it's just the person behind me, or if there's no seats, someone will give up their seat for me. People are just in general very nice to me. Some people will take that the wrong way and say like, oh, that's just because they want something from you because you're a girl. But I don't know. I just can't see the world through that way. Maybe I'm naive, but I just like to believe that people are just just friendly and kind, and maybe that's why. Um, Maybe I'll have a different opinion in 10 years or something. But with my peer group, like people, my friends who are girls are generally are just like me. So they report similar experiences. Um, yeah, I don't really
So you haven't
know.
noticed any difference between the way men relate to you and your peers, aside from, say, the hot girl privilege? I'm wondering if, like, I presume you're fairly traditional. I'm wondering if that has an effect on then how men relate to you.
I think there is a difference, like now that I think about it, but it's not necessarily because of the way I look or anything like that. I think it's because of the things that I like to talk about. So I like to talk about very intellectual subjects, philosophy, literature, like talk about, the interesting part of the latest book that I've read and I want to discuss it, or like what's the meaning of something, or like I talk about some scientific concept that I've learned. And it's just natural. I'm not trying to impress anyone. I'm not trying to like, appear smart. It's just like when you learn something interesting, you have, I'd imagine that most people have an impulse to discuss it, but I found that not everyone does. It's only certain people. So I get really happy when I meet people who do want to discuss it. And I think this generally ends up being guys and not girls. Um, yeah, so when guys meet me, sometimes they like are thrown aback because I like to talk about different types of subjects. Um, but I don't think it has anything to do with me being a girl. I don't know.
And Rob Henderson has a tweet that a high IQ hampers a woman's chance to get married while it is a plus for men. Do you think this is true?
Um, I I don't know why that like correlation was found, but I remember I know what you're referring to because I retweeted it about the homeschooling thing. And I think that I don't know what this like who was included in the study or how they measured IQ, but I think that the most basic understanding of it would be, oh, well, if women are hypergamous and always want to marry someone who is better than them, then of course high IQ women are going to look for more intelligent men, and because intelligence is in low supply, there would be fewer men available for them to select from, and so it actually hampers their ability to have success in relationships just because of the diminished pool of applicants. Um, but I think that logic doesn't apply because high IQ is not the only virtue to have. It is a virtue. It's not the only virtue, and far and away, it's not even the most important virtue. So when that's why like when a man is selecting a woman or when a woman is selecting a man, it should play a role. Like you don't want to be with someone who's unintelligent because the person that you're with is someone that you're going to rely on for a lot of things throughout your life, and you want to put your trust in someone who you know will be there and will know what to do when you're in trouble. So high IQ in that way is a valuable thing to search for in both men and women. Um, Perhaps younger men don't understand it as much. I'm not sure. It could be that they're more distracted by looks, and so they could select a woman and commit to her even if she's unintelligent, and then don't think in the long term in the same way that women may think in the long term. Um, but like that's just a hypothesis. So I think that having a high IQ only hampers a woman's prospects for dating if she allows her intelligence if she allows her intelligence to turn her arrogant and turn her unkind toward people, and if it spoils her nature. So with any virtue, like it can also be with beauty. Like you can say that a woman who's extremely beautiful could have worse dating prospects because she allows her beauty to turn her very narcissistic or vain or judgmental of other people. And so it all comes down to personality. So if you're an extremely beautiful woman and you're highly intelligent, the most important thing to do is to not allow these good qualities to ruin your personality. Because even no matter how much manosphere or like any dating gurus on Twitter talk about, oh, like good personality is just a way to say that she's fat. Like I don't think, like, while it's funny, I don't think it's deeply true because at the end of the day, someone who's beautiful, you can spend time with them for a while, but if they don't have a good personality, you're not going to want to spend a lot of time with them, definitely not your life with them. Same goes with someone who's intelligent. If they don't have a good personality, you won't want to be around them. And wanting to be around someone, enjoying their energy and like enjoying the positiveness that they bring into your life, that's ultimately what everybody wants.
Have you had much experience with the fragile male ego where the man is intimidated by your intelligence?
Um, I've had some experience with it, but mostly online. I've never experienced it in person. I think when you're online, you can't show your whole personality. You just have your words to speak for you. So if, I say something in a certain way and someone is already kind of angry about something or depressed or just, has anger toward anything in their life, and they read something that I've written and it makes them like it gives them an outlet to project that anger, that's what happens. So I have seen that, and I've gotten better at seeing and not taking things personally when I see that people get angry at what I've written. Um, with When it comes to fragile male ego, it's like I've experienced it. Like the one hilarious way that I've experienced it is like people will say that I'm trying to show that I'm intelligent just so I can get guys or something, or I can beat a guy, and like I'm LARPing as intelligent.
Sorry.
And I was like, why? Like, in order for me to pretend and trick people that I'm intelligent, wouldn't I just have to be intelligent? Like, isn't it possible that I am actually intelligent? And another thing that I've gotten is like, people think I'm an old man who's using some girl's Instagram and like stealing her pictures to convince people that I'm actually a girl. Like, it's so hilarious.
And what do you think about arranged marriages in, say, 2021 in North America? Good idea, bad idea?
I think it depends on the context, like with everything. So I've known most of the marriages in my life that I see are arranged marriages, and they're actually really good marriages. So, like, I know I don't want to talk too much about my personal life, but my brother had an arranged marriage, and he and his wife just they were like childhood friends, and then they drifted apart because we switched countries and she didn't, and then they like reconnected through my parents and just started talking. And because in India the custom is like, you're not supposed to have a boyfriend. So if my brother wanted to keep talking to her and being with her, then he had to marry her. So they got married after knowing each other for about like 2 or 3 months, like as adults. Like they already knew of each other before, but they didn't know each other well. So they had an arranged marriage and now they have a really good bond. They're really happy together. They've been married for like 3 years and it's just, it's worked out well. My parents had an arranged marriage, my grandparents, my aunts and uncles. So with arranged marriages, like the pros of it are that the families know each other, and when the families know and respect each other, then I think when the couple has arguments, which are inevitable, the family can support the couple to stay together and work through their issues. And they also have the wisdom of their parents who have been in a relationship much longer than them to help them work through their issues. Because someone who's 50 years old and has been married for 25 years knows a lot more about relationships than someone who's just gotten married or like has only been with someone for a few years. So they can offer their guidance and help. Whereas I think in Western cultures, families are very hands off with relationships. And so a young couple who's been together for a few years, when they face relationship problems, they don't always have the same guidance from their parents or their aunts and uncles. Um, the downsides of arranged marriage are that, someone might marry someone that, they're not really attracted to just because of like convenience, or it just logically on paper seems like a good idea. And they might, and sometimes parents could have, not all families are good. Sometimes parents can have poor judgment and they can select someone who's not actually a good person for their son or daughter. So there's risk involved with an arranged marriage as well. I think there's risks with both, I guess like it's called like love marriage is the alternative. Um, there's risks involved with both love marriage and arranged marriage. The risk with love marriage is that you might not find someone who you understand and connect with like that. Or you could find them, but you won't find them at the right time in your life. Like you can miss out on a lot of opportunities. For example, for a woman, she might not find someone until her late 30s and then miss out on her chance to have a big family. So these are some of the risks. Um, in life, whenever you're making decisions, you always have to decide what risks you're willing to take and what risks you're not willing to take. And no one else can make that decision for you, and you don't need to explain that decision to anybody else either.
So, how would you assess the current relationships between men and women in their 20s? Are we on a good trajectory? Are we on a bad trajectory as Western civilization?
As weird as it sounds, I think we're on a good trajectory. I know that most people won't have this opinion, but the reason that I have this opinion is because the political climate, the social climate has become so polarizing that it's become so easy for people to tell right away that they're not going to get along with someone and that their values don't match. Like they can know in an instant just by, or even just like one conversation, they can tell, okay, this person, um, you know, believes that online prostitution is good and that, um, giving hormone blockers to a 7-year old and confusing them about their sex is good. Like, I'm obviously not going to get along with them, or they don't value their family, or they have bought hook, line, and sinker into woke culture. So, like, the men and women who don't buy into the modern degeneracy, they are more likely to find each other much more easily, and they also appreciate each other a lot more because, when like I have a friend who, when he found a girl who didn't have any of these crazy values and like had really good values, he really appreciated her, and I thought that was so like touching and good to see because like you don't see it all the time that you find a girl or a guy who thinks like that. So I think that's why, and these are the people who are going to be having children anyway, and therefore they're going to be the ones who are instilling values in the next generation. So I think that's why I'm very hopeful.
So in the world that you see, do you see quite a bit of courtship, or is it more dating, or is it just more hooking up? Are we perhaps trending towards a more traditional courtship arrangement between the sexes?
I don't really know because I only have access to one small part of the world. So I don't, sometimes I have acquaintances who live in like LA and they tell me things and my jaw is on the floor. Like, I didn't even know this was going on our planet. This is so incredible to me to hear. And where I live, it would be like unheard of. So my experiences aren't necessarily representative of the whole world. So I don't know. I think many women like they who I talk to, they say this jokingly, but then I know because of the way that they're joking about it that they're really sincere. That they just say like I just want to be somebody's wife. I want to have kids and bake banana bread at home. And I'm just like they're joking about it, but I know that that's what they really want. So like I know people are dating to get married. Like they're not dating just to waste their time. The people that I know anyway. And of course, there's going to be selection bias there because like the people that I'm associating with obviously have values similar to me. So I don't know what's going on in the rest of the world.
Why do, at least what I see, so many young women dress like prostitutes and be so free to, say, send out nude pictures or to join an OnlyFans, start an OnlyFans? I mean, it just seems so anti-feminine. From my understanding, any woman who's promiscuous, there's got to be something mentally wrong because it goes so much against everything that I understand about femininity.
So I'll address, there's like so many pieces to that question. One of them would be dress. Um, the dress question is the easiest one to answer. Why do so many women dress like prostitutes? And here's the answer. When was the last time you went shopping?
Me, I haven't gone shopping for years. I mean, I get everything over the internet.
Yeah, so for a girl, going shopping is an event. I don't know, I can't speak for all girls, but I know for like many girls, it's an event. It's has its own fun. You go and try on clothes, you try on different outfits. You like to window shop, even if you're not buying anything. So when I go to normal malls and normal stores, there's only two types of clothes. It's either pajamas or prostitute outfits. There's no in between really, except for like some stores or like you have to really hunt. You have to know what you're looking for if you're trying to find feminine clothes. Like all the dresses, none of the dresses will be knee length. They'll always be like ending right below your bum. Um, None of the shirts really cover your midriff. And then if you go to like, and the alternative to these clothes are just pajamas, track pants, sweatpants, big t-shirts, big sweaters, and like jeans. So like all of these clothes are just unacceptable. They're all horrible. And I'm very elitist when it comes to clothes. And not in a monetary way, but in like an aesthetics way. So I kind of knew how I like to dress was I called it vintage retro style before because I didn't really know who I was when I was 20. But then I realized it's just because I like to dress feminine. So I would like put together Pinterest pictures of like girls from the 40s, girls from the 50s, like I really liked Audrey Hepburn's outfits and Kate Middleton's outfits. So I would put them together and then like I had like a mental image of what I'm looking for. And then when I went into the mall, I would like be hunting for like those specific pieces of clothing and I would find them or I would go to the thrift store or I would buy it online. And then the way that I ended up dressing was like very different from how girls are normally dressing these days. And at first I felt uncomfortable for standing out. I would walk through campus and be like, "Oh my God, I'm dressed like a cartoon character. This feels so weird." And I was just wearing like a pleated skirt with a blouse and a cardigan. And then after a while, I just felt more comfortable with it, and people just expected me to dress like that. And then I started to get compliments, and then girls started asking me where I get these clothes, and then it just, I saw more and more people dressing like that. Not that I started it, probably like lots of girls had this same intuition as me, and then it's just simultaneously happened. So now I see it more often, especially with online shopping. So there's definitely the internet has been good in helping people who don't subscribe to mainstream culture to find their niche. Um, why do girls behave like prostitutes? That's a more difficult question. And you said it has to do with mental illness. I think it definitely has to do with a mental issue. I wouldn't say I don't know if it's mental illness every single time. Um, the mental issue could just be that they want some attention, some attachment from people, specifically men. Um, and they believe maybe that their body is the way to get to this because it gets a really big reaction. Just like how a little kid who's not getting attention might start swearing because everybody reacts to swearing really dramatically. So maybe that's why. I think that um, it's also like when things start to become more common, especially vices, you feel more comfortable doing them. So very few people smoke these days that I see, and it's very looked down upon to smoke. Like, ew, it's so disgusting. Why are you smoking? Um, but it's perfectly okay for people to drink energy drinks or eat like crap food. So why? Like they're both extremely harmful to you. Why is one less acceptable than the other? And why is one like done more than the other? So the reason for that is it's socially acceptable to eat junk food because everybody around you is doing it. Um, and I think the same can be said for prostitute behavior with girls. As it becomes more common and normalized, it becomes like the girls who had the seed of that vice in their heart, but just didn't lack the courage to do it. They felt more emboldened to do it when everybody around them or like many people around them and were doing it and they had examples to follow. So that's why I think it's more common.
Do you believe in free will?
Man, you have one good question after the other. It's a what an easy question.
Yeah, come on now.
Yeah, so I think like it's like 50-50. So there's this anime I watched called Hunter x Hunter, which is one of my favorite anime shows. And in it, there's this thing called like Nen power. I, I'm gonna go like totally like kid on you, but there's so in the show there's like 5 or 6 different versions of Nen. I don't really remember how many there are, but you can like practice any of them, like different ways to manifest your power. But if you like everybody is born with a specific skill that they're good at. So if they pursue that skill and spend all their practicing time on that skill, then they will become really excellent in it and can achieve greatness. But if they put all of their practice into a different type of power, it doesn't matter how much they practice, they will never achieve greatness. Um, so I think that's kind of how I understand free will versus destiny or determinism because I think that everyone has their own nature that is ineluctable and unique to them. And if they spend their life, they can spend their whole life rejecting their nature and trying to become something that they're not, which is, their free will. Um, but they will never achieve greatness that way and they will never become fully comfortable with themselves. But if they understand who they are and they accept it and they work with their nature, they can achieve a lot more. Um, I think that I think that free will does exist in terms of the decisions people make. I read the book about free will by Sam Harris, and it was convincing in some of the arguments where he said, if you think about a murderer who comes in and kills a whole family, what if it was he's kind of saying that it's like it's determined that he was going to become a murderer because he was born with a certain set of genes. He was like he had certain parents, he had certain upbringing that he had like all these factors that he couldn't control that contributed to him becoming a murderer one day. I think that argument doesn't actually work because it takes away all of the responsibility and power from the person, and it negates all of the instances where there are people who have like every single card stacked against them, and yet they still end up making the right decision, doing the right thing. And Sam Harris might say, oh, because there's something in your brain that, made that person more likely to make that right decision. But I think that's just escaping the bigger. I think that's a cheap escape. I don't think that works. I'm not convinced by it. Um, and I always think about Faust, in the play about Faust, because in like Goethe's Faust, he was constantly given opportunities to redeem himself and repent for his mistakes, um, and his evils that he did, but he constantly turned away from them. That was his free will. I think if free will doesn't exist, there's no such thing as good or evil because good or evil only exist insofar as you can select them.
Well, there's no such thing as objective good and evil unless there's a transcendent source of morality. Otherwise, it's just opinion, right?
Yeah, like I'm not sure if I understood everything that you said,
Yeah, there's
but
only objective good and evil if there is a transcendent source of morality. In other words, only if the creator of the universe says this is good and this is bad is there objective good and bad. Otherwise, there are only opinions. Otherwise, you have your opinion on what's evil. I have my opinion on what's evil. Who's to say who's
yeah,
right unless there's something above us?
yeah. I think, and that's where like the idea of the divine being in every single soul really resonates with me because that's where I think we get this idea that what feels right to you. So someone who is healthy and raised with a lot of love and attention and all these good things, they have some kind of conscience inside them that tells them this is right and this is wrong. What is that source? And I think that that source is the divine that's in every single soul that tells them.
Uh, what do you think about the idea that I learned in my Alexander Technique training that all beliefs are just unnecessary muscular tension?
I'm not really familiar with that. Can you explain it?
Okay, so you'll notice that when you're most relaxed, your beliefs are the lightest. They're not intense for you. And whenever you start believing something intensely, it is always accompanied by increased muscular tension. In fact, you cannot even have a thought without having increased muscular tension. You
Oh
can't
wow,
think,
that's so interesting.
right? So I can't do I can't come up with a question for you without experiencing increased muscular tension, and that tension will always also reflect in my voice. So if I have extra muscular tension in my ankle, that's going to transmit through my voice. So everything we think, it radiates in our musculature, in our alignment. That's why we can tell when we know someone what they're thinking because we see ripples of what they're thinking across their face or across their body. Do you, do
Right.
you have any thoughts
That's
on any
actually
of that?
really interesting. I hadn't considered that before, but it makes sense because it fits in with the paradigm of German New Medicine. Have you ever heard about that?
No.
German New Medicine is this paradigm that attempts to redefine medicine in a more useful way. And one of its core tenets is that the psyche and the body are not separate things, that they're one and the same. That and that's like they don't merely communicate with each other, they are each other. So and this fits in with my like what I've learned about neuroscience, which is that your nervous system is not merely in your brain, it's all over your body. So what does it mean to think? To think means to process information. Um, Processing information means taking in some outside input, doing something with it, altering it, combining it, synthesizing it, and then it influences the decision that's made later on, whether it's conscious decision or subconscious decision. So when we think of thinking in this way, we think with our bones, we think with our muscles, we think with our hands even. You can find evidence of thinking in every single cell in your body, because when there's like every cell in your body participates in the information synthesis and analysis process. So it makes perfect sense to me that your body would be involved in expressing your core beliefs, for example.
Yeah, and think about how many calories are burned by thinking. I mean, mental labor is like a primary source of energy consumption in our bodies. I mean,
Yeah,
when you're doing hard
definitely.
thinking, it's burning the calories. I mean, you can sweat just from thinking.
Yeah, I think that also has to do with like an emotional response. Like when you're talking about your muscles tensing up, when you're talking about your core beliefs, like it could just be that with your core beliefs, you have more vulnerability because think about it, your core beliefs are one of the ways that you form your identity. Like I am this because like even people even say this, I am a traditionalist. What does that mean? That means that you've defined yourself based on a certain set of values. And so human beings are very sensitive to their identity being threatened because it's a lot of emotional, psychological work to rebuild your identity. So if your identity is tied to a core belief and you're in a discussion with someone or something that might challenge that core belief, I think, of course, your muscles would tense up because it's going to be like a fight or flight response. You're going to have to be okay with you're preparing yourself for the possibility that your identity will be challenged and you might have to rebuild it, or you will have to defend it somehow. So when you're more relaxed, when you're with people, when your muscles are relaxed, when talking about your core beliefs, for example, it's probably because you're in an environment where you know they're not going to be challenged. I think this is also why children ask better questions because they haven't fully formed their identity yet. So when they're entering in discussions, they don't have any risks or vulnerabilities for core beliefs that could be challenged. Like they don't have any core beliefs yet. They're just learning. They're purely learning. So they have no problem asking really difficult, obvious questions that adults might run away from.
You said that we know ourselves by our core beliefs, and it's just making me think we also know ourselves by our familiar muscular tension patterns. So, as an
Yeah.
Alexander teacher, when I encourage people to let go of these weird contortions that they have going on, either with their shoulders, their neck, their back, they're kind of floating. They don't really know themselves because they know themselves by their habitual ways of tightening and compressing.
Yeah, that's really interesting. I like it makes sense, but I'd never thought about it before. People have their own gestures. Have you ever seen so there's some movies that I've watched like biopics where an actor is like acting through the life of someone else and like telling the story, and sometimes I'm really impressed by these movies. There's one movie called it's a Bollywood movie about the biography of Sanjay Dutt, who's a famous actor who went through a lot in his life, and when that movie was remade as a biopic, the new actor had even picked up like the gestures of the person. He didn't even the actor they got to play him and the real person, they didn't look very much alike. But when he was acting out the gestures, I could so clearly tell like it was he was doing such a good job at portraying him. And so that really makes sense that our gestures are part of our identity. People can recognize us with them.
Yeah, but because when I take on someone's tension patterns, I often, just for an experiment, I often feel like I can get a sense of how they're experiencing life. And also, it seems fairly obvious that every emotion is only possible with a particular alignment of the musculature. That in that lovely poised photo with the beauty queen tiara on your head, as you were so poised, there was no way you were going to be able to experience the darker, heavier emotions. You were poised, and so you're only going to feel variations on serenity. If you wanted to feel depressed or angry, you'd have to pull down, contort, and compress yourself. Do you have any thoughts on
Yeah.
that?
Yeah, thank you for the compliment. That makes sense because when people go to massage therapists, it's often like working out the knots from their normal gesture patterns. Um, yeah, that's I had never even thought about it. This is the first time I'm encountering this idea, so it's very interesting.
Uh, what do you do to take care of your mind and the rest of you? Do you have a philosophy of health?
Yeah, actually, I have a philosophy of health, which is like, work with by nature rather than against it. So, um, I don't use makeup. I use makeup sometimes, like if I'm going to a party, which hasn't been for a long time, or anything like that, but not like regularly. Um, and that way I allow my skin to breathe how it's naturally meant to breathe. I think that our body has systems to deal with everything and it's very intelligent and knows what it's doing better than we do. So if we just let our body be and follow our cravings, for example, for food, I try to eat whole foods instead of processed foods and then also still follow my cravings. So for example, if I want something sweet, I'll eat a mango instead of um, going for like a donut. And I think, but I won't deny myself the sweet thing if I'm craving it. Um, I think if we have all of our nutritional needs met, our cravings are beneficial to us and tell us what we might be missing in our body. Um, when I when I walk, I'm really aware of my posture. Like I go for walks all the time and I try to be aware of my posture when I'm walking so that I'm actually getting something out of the walk instead of ruining my muscles. Um, I also do this thing. Um, I'm trying to think of like what else I do for my health. I exercise, I lift weights, but it's not the same as it was when I used to go to the gym, but it's something. For
You,
health, I also like make sure to take care of my emotional health. I've kind of always done this, but I'm more aware of it now, which is I don't distress myself. I try to like, if I feel emotionally distressed, I have a lot of different coping mechanisms that make me feel better. And I know what those are, like spending time with my little sister, doing some art, going into nature and like, taking pictures of like doing photography or even just like exercising. Like I have lots of different coping mechanisms or calling a friend, and going like having a really long conversation. All of these things help me feel emotionally and psychologically well. I think like when you have these coping mechanisms, you take care of your health a lot better.
do you have any thoughts on cognitive enhancers? So many people use nicotine as a cognitive enhancer. Other people use caffeine. Then there are a whole range of smart drugs, like things like modafinil. Do you have any thoughts on smart drugs and cognitive enhancers?
I think all of the discussions, if you'll notice, always come from guys about cognitive enhancers and never girls, because guys are obsessed with tools, and they always are interested in what can do something faster, better, more efficiently than other things. So I think, yeah, like this is so. I think before somebody uses nicotine, caffeine, modafinil, etc., like you should think about if you're actually optimizing yourself first of all. Like are you getting enough sleep? Are you happy every day? Are you getting sunshine and are you getting good food and fulfilling all your nutrient needs? if you're getting all of these things, people will find that they their energy is a lot higher anyway, and they don't really need these extra things. So when people take Adderall to try to get more work done, like I don't think they actually get more work done. I think they just get a normal amount of work done because someone who's actually disciplined and has all of these other aspects of their life figured out, they would already have a way to use their day the best that they can. But if someone hasn't figured out all of these other things, the drug just brings them back to from like negatives to like normal instead of enhancing them. You know what I mean?
Yes. Yes.
So, yeah.
What do you think of antidepressants and SSRIs like Prozac?
I think antidepressants have a lot of side effects, as with any medication. And I think these side effects are not insignificant and trite. I think, it affects fertility, it affects hormones. They have lots of side effects such as nausea. They can, affect your libido. I think just interfering with your body in that way is not a good fix for anything. I'm speaking obviously from a place of privilege because I've never had to use those kinds of drugs, and I don't feel compelled to use them. And I'm like, so I can be compassionate toward people who are depressed or anxious and feel like those drugs have given them back their life. So those kinds of people do exist. So I'm not going to say that it's just, never use them or something. But I will say that it's just like those performance enhancers that we just talked about. If you are a person who doesn't have everything else in your life sorted out, and I'm not just talking about physical stuff like, oh, you're getting 8 hours of sleep and you're eating enough food every day of like the highest quality. It's not just that, it's also emotional needs. Like, are your relationships what you want your relationships to be? Are they sincere and genuine? Are you doing work that is meaningful to you, or do you just feel like you're killing time every single day? So these are the harder questions that people don't like to answer, especially if they've invested a lot into those decisions already. For example, if they've been in a relationship for several years and they don't want to mess it up, so they don't want to face that fact. Or if they've invested like hundreds of thousands of dollars getting training for a certain career, and then they realize that it's not meaningful work to them. They don't find joy from that every day, and it kind of just they're just kind of killing those hours and just waiting for the day to end so they can go home. Um, that like it can be really daunting to face that that's not what they want to do for their whole life. So rather than face those things, I think people take the drugs instead. Or even like if they have attachment issues or emotional issues that have followed them and haunted them for their whole life that prevent them from making friends or building proper intimate relationships, rather than working through those issues, they will take the drug to feel better. So it's it's definitely an easier way out, but I don't think it's a long-term fix for a lot of problems. And I think with anything worth having, if you want the genuine solution, it will take a lot of work, which unfortunately many people are not willing to do.
Yeah, what's kind of shocking is that the evidence for the efficacy of these drugs is only slightly better than the placebo effect. And what we do know incontrovertibly is that all of these drugs shrink the brain. So I just can't see that shrinking the brain is a good thing.
Yeah, I didn't know that they shrank the brain. That's really interesting. I guess it could be because of negative feedback, right? Like when if you're producing these neurotransmitters naturally by through your brain cells, and then you have drugs that deliver the neurotransmitters exogenously, it might act as a negative.
Yeah, the
Um,
prefrontal cortex does not get the input it needs. The prefrontal cortex is being shut down by drugs like Prozac. That reduces the psychotic symptoms, but it also causes the prefrontal cortex to slowly atrophy.
yeah, that's really unfortunate. I think people should just be like my philosophy on like medical interventions is just try to figure out everything else first, you know, and then see if you need to take the drug.
What do you think about psychiatry as a discipline? And as a putative science, do you think it is science, like say internal medicine or the hormone doctor? I forgot the name for that.
Endocrinologist.
Yeah, endocrinologist.
Um, that's another interesting question. I think that psychiatry is LARPing as a science, but it isn't really. And
Yeah, keep
the
going.
reason that I say that is because um, none of the psychological, like, I think, I don't remember when exactly it was, but there was a time when it came out that none of the psychological studies could be um, replicated. It's called the replication
Yes,
crisis,
yes,
like including Zimbardo's prison study, which is the most famous one. People keep repeating it over and over again.
yeah.
It couldn't be replicated. So when we have theorems that come out of these studies, they're not actually proper scientific theorems. They're just, you know, they're just conjectures. But the thing is, people are not wrong. Like the people who enter psychiatry have some interest in the human mind and the human psyche, and they want to explore it. But I think because we've turned it into a science, we've actually limited our ability to explore the human mind and the psyche in the proper way that it needs to be. And I think the only way that the human mind can be properly explored is through literature and um, through philosophy. So, for example, when you're reading um, great works of literature like Tolstoy, Dostoevsky, Charles Dickens, any of these writers, when you finish their books, you'll find that you have learned a lot about human nature and how people's minds work, and it wasn't a psychology textbook. So what these writers did is they tested out their ideas by putting different traits in different characters, and these writers were geniuses. Um, so that's how they could come to these conclusions. They had seen a lot about the world, and to understand what they had seen about the world, they wrote this novel, and the novel is itself the experiment. Even Carl Jung, Freud, David Hume, all these philosophers are actually psychiatrists in my estimation, or like not psychiatrists, like studying the psychiatric science
It,
better,
yeah,
quote
it's
unquote.
amusing people's misapprehension of psychiatry. I think it's initially promoted by psychiatry. For example, it's a widely held understanding that psychiatric drugs, they simply fix chemical imbalances in the brain, and that's not what happens. There are no objective tests, radiographic or with blood, for psychiatric illness. So
Yeah,
it's
people who
go ahead.
want to, yeah, like people who want to like, go against quote unquote conspiracy theorists who, don't subscribe to mainstream science. Um, they say like, oh, and they report, for example, anti-vax moms. They report like they post a lot of things about papers and that show strong correlations between certain things, and then their detractors will say, oh, well, correlation is not a causation. So your ideas are null and void. However, the idea of chemical imbalances being related to mental illness is itself a correlation and not a causational study, because studies in which these chemical imbalances are replicated in animals do not reliably show that the mental illness itself is recreated. So it's not a causational phenomenon at all. The chemical imbalance is a consequence of other things happening in a person's life that manifest as a chemical imbalance. So correcting the chemical imbalance just causes the symptoms to go away, but the problems are still there, and they're just not um, manifesting in the same place. They're going somewhere else. I'll give you like a more tangible example of this is high blood pressure. So you might know that high blood pressure is a very common phenomenon. Lots of people have it. Why is high blood pressure? So high blood pressure occurs when the arteries are more occluded or stenotic. So that means there is buildup in the arteries due to the person's diet and other things. So, or the person is more overweight. So the heart has to pump a lot harder to get the blood to all of the different limbs so that your body doesn't atrophy, or different organs are not damaged. So the high blood pressure has a functional role for the person. If the person just takes their blood pressure medication, what will it do? It will just cause their blood pressure to go down. It won't necessarily resolve the issue of why there was high blood pressure in the first place. So, whereas if a person reduces their weight and improves their diet, they can cause the reason for the high blood pressure to go away, the underlying cause, and they will be a lot healthier. Whereas someone who's taking blood pressure medication, it actually will cause other problems in their life, because if the blood is not reaching all of these organs properly, then they're going to have other issues that manifest. So interfering with your body is like it's like pulling a piece of a spider web and thinking like nothing else will be affected except this one strand.
Now, identical twin studies show that identical twins raised in different homes tend to have very similar life results, which kind of brings into question how much of an impact normal parenting has on people. So, do you think that there are parenting styles that produce radically different life results? Because I'm not aware of evidence for that. Or do you think we are primarily essentially born into the world with a photo negative, and then depending on circumstance, yeah. What do you think?
I don't think so, because I've read a lot of twin studies too, and they're not always the same. And that's the key point, because when they do twin studies for attachment, for example, with monkeys, they find that monkeys that are given a mother who is warm and real and feeds them and everything, they turn and nurtures them, they turn out a lot healthier psychologically and less aggressive and less avoidant than monkeys who are given the same amount of nutrition and safety, but they're not given like a cuddly mother. It's just like a machine. So, and they're twins. Um, and there are a lot of twin studies done for a lot of different psychological um, phenomena. So it's not always the case that nurture plays like little effect. Nurture does play an effect, especially with attachment. I think that's the most prominent example that I can talk about is the way that your parents or your caregiver attaches to you in the first years of life has a really big impact on how you connect with other people in the rest of your life. Um, but however, where the twins are the same, regardless of environment, I think that would be because even in utero, you have certain influences. So, for example, what kinds of stressors the mother is exposed to, what kind of nutrients she's eating, all of these things play a role in your development, even if you have different genes, like, for example, fraternal twins. they would still be affected by all of these epigenetic changes that are occurring due to the mother's activities during pregnancy. Um, and I think genes themselves, they do play a huge role in lots of different areas of life. For example, your IQ is highly related to your genes. Your talents are also related to your genes and your disposition. This is really weird. I've only seen this anecdotally, but parents who are very talented in music, they tend to have children who are talented in music. And this isn't just a phenomenon of, oh, because, the child was just around music for their whole childhood. So of course they would be interested, but the thing is, like, every child is not interested in music. Like one or two will be, but not the other ones. So, and they have the same environment. Or another example is me and my brother. So my mom has a master's in musical theory, and she was a singer. So she has a lot of talent musically, and I don't. I just, I tried to learn, and I was just like okay at it, and I didn't really have a lot of interest in it. Whereas my brother, and we had a lot of music in the house growing up as well. Um, Whereas my brother, he also wasn't interested in music. He didn't even like gravitate toward it, or he didn't take any music lessons. He doesn't know how to read theory, but he can pick up any instrument and he can just hear a song a few times and play it without any notes. And when he sings exactly perfectly. Like there's no mistakes. And it's really strange how he would have done that without schooling. Um, and so that tells me that there is some genetic connection with talents that hasn't been properly explored.
Do you think it's possible that our attachment styles are primarily genetic? You're probably aware of the Big Five personality test. So whether people are open or not, whether they're conscientious or not, E, extroverted or introverted, OCA, what's A? I'm trying to remember. N is neurotic.
Agreeable?
Yeah, agreeable. So is it possible that our personalities and our attachment styles are primarily a function of our genetics, or do you side with classical attachment theory that our attachment styles are primarily a function of our first year of life?
I think it's probably both. I'm not familiar with these theories to have a more educated answer, but it's probably both. I don't
Okay.
know.
Okay. What books have most influenced you?
Um, there's a book by Tom Robbins called Skinny Legs and All, and it's a book about these inanimate objects who are trying to get to Jerusalem. And I know this sounds really odd, and there's like a belly dancer and an artist, and they're disjointed characters, but all of their stories are related. This book, it's really difficult to explain the plot, but the plot doesn't matter that much. This book, it really influenced me because it told me that there's more to the world than you can see with your eyes. There's something else going on.
Tell me the name of the
And
book again.
Skinny Legs and All.
Okay, it came out in 1990.
Yeah, and it was just so poetic the way that it was written. There were so many different stories in there, and it was just really profound. It just taught me that the way that we see things might just be because of the lens that we're seeing them through. And it taught me that you do actually have the option of opening your mind and seeing things through the perspective of, you know, bigger time, smaller time. It sounds really strange, but I think you have to read it to understand. So, and not a lot of people know about this book, so that's why I'm like, I always tell people to read it.
Okay, great. How about another book that's really affected you?
The Brothers Karamazov by Dostoevsky.
Dostoevsky, yeah.
Yeah, that's a really famous one. It's really obvious why it would be so impactful. It took me a whole summer to read it because every time I would read something, I had to spend so much time thinking about it, and I didn't want to rush it because there's no point rushing it. Like you want to like get everything beneficial out of it. Um, Another book was 1Q84 by Haruki Murakami.
Oh, yeah.
That book's also like really popular. A lot of people like it. The Four Loves by C.S. Lewis. Um, The Goldfinch by Donna Tartt. So, yeah, I would say like, oh, and a book that just makes me laugh and makes me in a good mood is The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy. So,
Yeah. Now, have you found using social media and the internet has affected your attention span?
um, I think it's affected it in a positive way because it just the internet's kind of like a tool. It affects you based on how you interact with it. So at first, when I started using Twitter, it was just like recording random interesting ideas that I collected throughout my life by reading a book or listening to a podcast or just thinking about something. And then as I used it more, I started to write essays on it. And because I had an audience, I didn't want to write something crappy. So I spent more attention on each of the ideas and fleshing them out and making sure that they would be well understood by any audience. And it also increased my attention span because I met so many people on there who were way more intelligent than me. And so I would, I would get their private information and then start conversations with them and have much longer conversations offline and like, on the phone or in DMs. And I learned so much from them, which I wouldn't have otherwise. So I don't think it negatively affected my attention span at all. I can still spend like 2 or 3 hours reading a book and not check my phone. It's not a problem.
I pick up my smartphone, my iPhone, about 50 times a day. How often do you think you pick up your smartphone?
Um, I've never counted it. I guess it just depends on the day. Like if I'm gardening or like I have a lot of jobs to do that day, I won't check my phone as much. But if I'm not doing a lot that day, if I'm just relaxing, I check it a lot more. I like doing things analog because you don't get distracted as easily. So, for example, I'm a painter. I sell my paintings and everything. When I'm doing this, I don't like to do it on a tablet precisely because I like to work with real life media, and be away from the screen. So with that, I don't get distracted by because when you're on your phone, you have 1,000 other tasks that can be done through your phone, and sometimes you get distracted. So, if I'm looking up a restaurant or something, and I'll get a notification from Instagram and like go check that. Like it's somebody who like, wants to buy a painting and have to talk to them. So you get distracted. Or if I'm looking up a reference image and then I get a notification from Twitter or like but I like to have my phone because sometimes I get an idea and I just like I have to write it down somewhere. And usually Twitter is just the most convenient place. And then I just write the idea down there as a tweet. And I don't know if this is a good or bad habit, but I don't know, that's just, and then when I go back and look at it, it's like, oh wow, that was an interesting thought. I don't even know where it came from. It just dropped down from the sky into my brain. Um, Even when I'm writing, like writing my essays that I publish, I don't write them on the computer first. I always write them longhand in my notebook, and then I leave it for a while, and then I come back, and then when I type it up again, more ideas come in, or like I look at them with fresh eyes.
Oh yeah, I mean, writing is I find is a very different experience writing by hand as opposed to typing. I have much more of an emotional and connection with the words. It's much less filtered when I just write by hand. What's your experience of the difference between composing via handwriting versus typing?
Yeah, it's a lot less daunting and it's more relaxed.
Okay, great. And out of everything that you do, what do you do best?
Hmm. Um, I'm not sure. I don't really know the answer. I think I teach the best. Like I'm that's yeah, that's the answer I'm gonna go with. I've always had the trait where if we learn something really complex in class or even something simple and somebody doesn't get it, I've always been the person that they can come to break it down for them and explain it in a easier way. And that's been who I am since I've had memories, really. Like my mom was a teacher, and so I would even go to school with her when she didn't have anywhere to send me for babysitting. And I remember helping her with everything, like helping her write the date on the board or like, you know, handing out the worksheets to the students. I just love doing that. And then as I got older, I was tutoring because I'm the oldest, so I have so many younger cousins and siblings, and I just remember tutoring them and helping them with their homework. And then, like my first part-time job was tutoring calculus. So it's just a natural thing that I think I do really well.
Okay, great. Is there anything that I should ask you which I have not asked you? The meaning of life.
Oh my God. We'll save that for a different
Yeah.
day.
Okay, great. Thank you so much for taking the time to talk to me, Margarita.
Yeah, no problem. Have a nice
Okay,
day.
take care now. Bye bye. Okay, so I put a link to her Substack and her Twitter in the video description.
Candidates is only masquerading